Okay, and what we want to do in this video is have a look at, I suppose, two of the most important groups in economics. Now, there are a number of ways you can define that, but basically we're going to have a quick look at two of the most important groups in economics and then take a look at some of the assumptions about one of those important groups, and that's the consumer. So there are the two most important groups in economics, quite loosely defined. There's a million different ways you can do this, but are the consumer. And what's a consumer? Well, a consumer is an individual that buys goods and services for their own personal use. So what we're saying here is that they're not buying things in order to sell them on. They're not buying, let's say, a Mac and, operating their internet business using that Mac, because that would make them a firm and that would make those things capital, like the Mac in that case. And if they were to engage in arbitrage, which is buying something in a cheaper market and reselling it again in a more expensive market, hence pocketing the difference, or a middleman, that would also make them a firm, and we're not saying that either. They are just individuals that buy goods and services because they want to have them and use them themselves, okay, and they derive pleasure from that. And the second group is the producer. Now, the firm or the producer is an individual unit of business which produces output and sells it in the market. Okay, so what they're trying to do is to make money. The reason why that firm exists or the producer exists is to make money by producing goods or services and selling them in the market. And I suppose in order to try to predict consumer behavior, in order to try to understand exactly what we mean with consumer behavior, we have to make a number of assumptions. And from these assumptions then, we can try to predict or make rational conclusions regarding what we believe consumers would do in different situations. So whenever you're thinking about consumers, try and keep these assumptions in mind. Now, the first one I hope would be somewhat obvious, is that a consumer has limited income. And the idea is that a consumer's income is never large enough to satisfy all of their infinite wants and needs. Now, what we have here is Bill Gates. Okay, this guy was owned Microsoft, and at one stage I think he was worth in excess of $100 billion. Okay, so an incredibly rich person. Here we have Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Facebook. He seems to be in a bit of financial trouble now with all of the investigations into Facebook's antics and stuff like that. But again, at least at one stage, an insanely wealthy individual. And then we have Ben and Jerry from the Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Just another example of successful entrepreneurs. And all of these people were incredibly wealthy, at least at one stage. But the thing was, no matter how wealthy they were, they couldn't buy planet Earth. Okay, they couldn't buy everything in existence on planet Earth. And I think that's when you take it to that degree, it becomes somewhat obvious. And you're like, well, obviously not. So the thing is, there were limits to their income. There were limits to their ability to purchase goods and services. And from that, then you have to say, okay, what's the next logical step? And the next logical step is a choice. So they must, even those people, now let's just take it to the average human being, whatever that is, or whoever that is. But, we have to make decisions on how we spend our money. We can't have everything that we want. And when a decision is made, that means that there is an opportunity cost. You must give up one thing in order to get something else. So that's obviously very, I suppose, obvious, but it's also very important. The second thing, again, I hope would be somewhat intuitive, is that the consumer seeks maximum utility from their income. What that means is they are trying to spend their money in such a way where they get the most happiness possible from their limited income. So they're like, okay, I can't afford everything that I want because I have infinite wants, and society has limited resources, limited factors of production, therefore limited production. So therefore, everybody can't have everything that they want. So I must make a choice. And when I'm making a choice as a consumer, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to get the most happiness possible from my limited income. That's the most important thing, okay? Now, this here, the consumer will obey or spend their money in such a way that obeys this rule, this principle, the equimarginal principle of consumer behavior, okay? It's to do with marginal utility and price. And if they do that, then what they actually get is a maximum total utility given their limited income and the different prices of each good. So you have no idea what that is yet. That is going to be the long subject of a number of videos coming up later on, okay? So just realize, okay, for the moment, there's a certain rule which a consumer should follow, a rational consumer should follow, follow in order to spend their money, which will give them the most total utility possible for their limited income. And we'll look at mathematical examples of that later on. The third one is that a consumer acts rationally. Now, there's many kind of bits of evidence to say that people don't act rationally, but in economics, I think it's really important to understand what we mean. And the thing is, the consumer takes action consistent with their preferences. That's what being rational means. So if you like one good, or you prefer one good over another, it's rational at least that you would buy that good as opposed to the other, at least the first time or second time, okay? Because there's reasons that we'll talk that you might change. So the example I always give is my favorite bar is like a Morrow bar, and I absolutely despise a Turkish Delight. So, usually if given the option, I mean, I can't imagine that I would change this, but I'm sure it's possible. But given the option, if someone said, would you like a Morrow bar or a Turkish Delight, I would always say I'd like a Morrow bar, please. And why is that rational? Well, let's think about it. We know that consumers have limited income, so they don't have unlimited money. We know that they take action in order to try to maximize their utility. So therefore, it would be stupid of me to try to maximize my utility by purchasing a bar of chocolate that I don't like when a bar of chocolate that I do like is available. And that is just purely logical, and hence rationality. Okay, so the idea is that the consumer takes action consistent with their preferences. And then, so we can make the kind of reverse, not assumption, but inference that if we see somebody doing something, well, then that means that they are taking actions consistent with their preferences, that means they like doing that, and therefore we're assuming that they're rational. So if we see an individual standing on his head trying to drink a glass of water upside down while holding a 50 euro note on fire, we can make the assumption that, well, they actually like doing that. Okay, now again, an extreme example, but hopefully one that'll stick in your head. The idea again of taking action consistent with their preferences or being rational is that if a consumer prefers fruit to chocolate, then it is rational that the consumer would buy fruit. Okay, and then what we have here is two identical hot dog stands, shops or restaurants, and they have the exact same recipe, the exact same hot dog, but one is priced differently. Let's say this one is cheaper than that one, so we would assume that the consumer would always go into this one if they're both the exact same identical good being sold at different prices right beside each other. Well, then the consumer is going to go for the cheaper good. And what we're saying, this is really important, the consumer seeks the best value for money. But then, and we will come to this, how do we define value for money? And essentially it's utils per euro, the amount of happiness you get per euro spent. But more on that later. The last one is that the consumer is subject to what is called the law of diminishing marginal utility. And what that means that as successive, as additional units, one after the other of a good are consumed, eventually the marginal utility, the extra happiness that a consumer gets, will fall per good, okay, because that's what marginal utility is. So if I'm really hungry and I have one of these chili cheese dogs, I could be like, and I like them, and so I'd be like, oh, this is great, like I get 20 utils of marginal utility for the first one, okay, and I'm a bit of a big boy, so I'll probably go for at least part of a second one. Let's just assume that I have to eat the whole second as well. It may increase my total happiness. It may give me a positive marginal utility. However, I'm quite sure it won't make me as happy as the first one did. It won't add to my total utility as much as the first one did. Therefore, what I'm saying is the marginal utility that I got from the second chili cheese dog is less than the marginal utility that I got from the first. And as such, the marginal utility has declined. And this is what this fourth assumption about the consumer is stating, that they are subject to the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now, if I was forced to eat the third one, I'm quite sure that the extra happiness that I get from consuming this third chili cheese dog would actually be negative. That would make my total utility fall. And again, it's falling. The extra happiness that I get from consuming one extra unit of a good is decreasing from the first to the second, and from the second to the third. So they're the four assumptions about consumer behavior. The first one is limited income. The second one is that they seek maximum utility. The third one is that they are rational, i.e. they buy the things that they want over the things that they don't want. And the fourth one is that they are subject to the law of diminishing marginal utility, the LDMU. And that will become important in later videos as well.